Okay, tape delayed podcast number one. We are back. I look like a mountain man. Dakota probably looks the same as you saw him in the previous episode because we fooled you. We taped these about 10 minutes after we did our last live show. So I hope you guys are good, enjoying the action. There may or may not be a reaction to the Canelo fight on the channel, but just in case, we are here. Dakota, are you excited to break down this week's fights, which are Anthony Joshua, Daniel Dubois in the UK at Wembley, a Riyadh season card? As we know, Dakota's a big Riyadh season guy, and Jaime Munguia fighting on a top ranked card against Erik Bazinyan.
Well, listen, bro. I think Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois is a great matchup for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, you get two British big names. You're going to get a big crowd, a lot of attention on the fight. Daniel Dubois has really earned this moment with the wins over Jarrell Miller and Hergovich. And we've talked about Joshua's competitive drive. Sometimes that's lacking in other superstar fighters, and so his continued willingness to fight kind of the best available guy is really admirable, and that's completely separate from whatever flaws he has as an actual fighter. But that's the part of him that I've always had a immense respect for.
What's the risk here? Because I kind of think this is an important moment in Joshua's career to not be labeled Frank Bruno. Because Bruno, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not the greatest Bruno historian, he didn't really win these type of fights. These were the fights that he struggled with. And Dubois looking like what he was originally promised to be before being stopped by Joe Joyce, which is possibly the next best British heavyweight. For me, this is an important test for Joshua to prove that he is the guy of the era and fend off a young guy who very well could be the great heavyweight when Joshua retires.
I think that Dubois has a level of fire and competitive desire, and potential, actual in-ring pressure that could give Joshua a lot of problems. It's going to force him to really, use his boxing ability. But we've also seen Daniel Dubois get hurt in multiple fights, and Joshua's a tremendous puncher, and he's shown I think more of a willingness to really sit down on shots in his last couple of fights, and I do kind of envision ultimately that being the biggest factor in the fight.
Is it safe to say this is the best version of Joshua, that he's always been a work in progress, but this Joshua might be the Joshua that people looked that thought he was when he beat Klitschko. But now, like after he's been through all these trials and tribulations, he might be the guy that's worthy of the hype now as opposed to then.
Maybe, and some of that comes with losing and with experience and with, like he's done, continually taking really tough matchups and having to answer tough questions every single fight. Um, and he's doing it again, man. It would not blow my mind if Dubois won this fight, but traditionally, I think these actually are kind of fights that Joshua's won, and the one I point to is Otto Wallin, where that's a certified contender right there. He beaten Gassiev, he'd given Tyson Fury, one of the toughest fights of his career, and Joshua made that fight look very easy. And a fight that I thought had the potential to be really tough for him.
So, what would you say when we handicap this fight is the greatest elite attribute of Dubois?
Um, that's a great question. I think really his stick to itness, meaning that and I know people called him a quitter after the Joyce fight. I didn't feel like that was a fair characterization. He's got a lot of guts, man, and he's shown, particularly like in the Miller fight, the Dubois fight, the Lorena fight, where he gets dropped and then he's able to stick with it and come back and get the finish. None of those fights that went perfectly, but he has a figure it out quality, and I think that that's sort of at the moment his best individual attribute.
The Lukie X factor. I just think that Dubois struggles with guys that really are willing to let their hands go and are bigger than him. Even though he's a big guy, he just really has struggled with guys that have a bit of power and throw. I think he's a top 5 heavyweight. I think he's right below Joe Parker. That being said, I think this is like you said, this is a levels thing where Joshua tends to win these fights. Dubois tends to lose these fights. And he tends to lose these fights in spectacular and strange fashion.
But I guess it depends on how you look at these fights. To some extent, I look at this as a 50-50 fight in light of the run that
The run
Dubois
he's
has
on,
on.
it is a 50-50 fight. Joshua's really impressed me, Dakota, over the last couple of fights.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And the one I put the most stock in is the Wallin fight. Obviously, knocking out Ngannou was impressive in light of what happened with Fury, but in general, that wasn't to some extent, that's what you should expect.
Perfect. Also on this undercard, we got Tyler Denny versus Hamzah Sheeraz. More than likely, in case people don't know, Tyler Denny's got a couple of upset wins. He beat I want to say he beat Bradley Rhea, a good promising prospect, and he also beat Felix Cash. He's just beating guys, taking a hard road, but Hamza seems to be a guy that a lot of people believe is going to be a dominant middleweight contender, title holder guy. This really seems like this is moving him to that place of getting a title shot very soon. Do you think anything goes wrong here and that we see a Tyler Denny third upset?
Listen, the Cash win was a good win, but I think that Hamza is just like a young, ascending guy that really doesn't have any holes in his game for the most part. And if anything, this fight, it's a decent matchup. It feels like a little bit of a step back from the Ammo Williams fight, which was a legitimate 50-50 fight, but it's also good to see him active. Um, when you're an active fighter, you don't always fight, the best opponent every time out. This kind of ties into some of what we were talking about on our last show. But, you know, um, if I get hired for two different job roles as a freelancer and one traditionally pays this and the other traditionally pays that, and this one's more, I don't just get this rate on every gig. This role still stays the same rate. And so sometimes you do have to take a little bit less money if you're not in as big of a fight. And that's part of staying active. And I'm glad to see Hamza, being a middleweight that we can reliably see every few months.
This is also a big fight in the UK, not a big fight in the US. Sometimes those two boxing worlds are different. I think Tyler Denny's wins have meant more to British fans than they've meant to American fans. It's like how O'Hara Davies, big story always in Britain, not a big story ever in America. And there's like a huge disconnect with some fighters. I think this is more of a regional based, interesting matchup for the market they're entering.
Which makes perfect sense. I just think Hamza is an elite guy. And so I think that this will likely be a levels fight. But listen, Tyler Denny's a pretty tricky guy. So it's a different style than we've seen him in with at least recently.
So also on this card, we got Anthony Cacace, probably said that all wrong, taking
I
on
think it's
Josh Warrington.
Sakachi. I think it's Sakachi.
Okay, I say it always wrong. We're gonna say Anthony. We're taking Tony's gonna be taking on Josh Warrington. You
Big
would have
Tom.
to suspect that our guy Tony is gonna win this one because he had such spectacular performance against Joe Cordina. Many people, not myself or you, thought Cordina was number one in the division. I thought that was a bit premature, given that he really hadn't fought those guys just yet compared to a Shock Foster and even a Lamont Roach. They had been kind of more tested, in my opinion. That being said, I just don't see how you have that performance and then lose to Warrington, who we think is on the back end of his career and moving up in weight.
Definitely on the back end and moving up in weight. The only thing about Warrington is just that he does make a fight of it. So against Lee Wood, he's winning the fight and he gets stopped. There's multiple fights of his that you can point to where he's in the mix and then he loses. And I think that it's possible that he does that in this fight as well for as long as it lasts. I think that he will be competitive. You got to remember, he basically, I scored his fight with Lopez a draw, with Renato Lopez a draw. That wasn't that long ago. I think that Warrington, interestingly enough, is just a guy who takes a lot of hard fights and he's generally in the mix in those hard fights, even if he loses.
For a dirty, rugged fighter, you don't typically use the word likable, but he's got a likableness for a guy that kind of
Yeah.
fouls all the time and is rough and aggressive. There's something to cheer about between him and his father. They're kind of the everymen, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, this is probably Sakachi's moment. The Cordelia win was like truly a great win, and he seems to be a guy on the ascend. And clearly Warrington's getting the opportunity because he's a well-known guy who's been
And
in
a
with a lot
ticket
of talent,
seller.
and
But
he's a
if he
ticket seller.
wins, would we go, man, that's shocking. Josh Warrington won another title. Like, I don't think it would blow our minds.
Well, it wouldn't blow our minds, and I think that's because he's consistently been competitive, even in losing efforts. Maybe outside of the first Laura loss, which was kind of a beatdown.
So I want to throw one thing out there to you. Are we undervaluing Warrington because he takes more hard fights? Like when you take hard fights to
Definitely,
sometimes, you know what I mean?
definitely. And it's all about the context of it. It's all about the context of it. He stopped Kiko Martinez, sandwiched in between Kiko Martinez, upsetting younger, bigger guys. So that he's just, I've always kind of I appreciate a guy who in his last 5 fights has only taken, top 5 guys of the moment. I appreciate that.
You know what? Upset Lukie pick. I'm taking Warrington. I really think
I'm
Warrington
not
might
ta-
pull it.
I'm gonna say I'm not taking Warrington. I just appreciate and respect what he's done in his career, and I'm not mad that this fight's happening.
I mean, he's an interesting fighter. Here's a fight for Lukie right here. I love this fight. We got Liam Smith versus Josh Kelly. These are two of my guys going up against each other. It's the battle of the gatekeepers. Uh,
I think Josh Kelly's more than a gatekeeper potentially, though, bub.
but they have losses, and I think their big opportunities are going to be in that blue corner, and they have to win a fight the hard way. They're not going to be spoon fed into here's a favorable guy that stylistically matches up well for you. They both have taken a few losses, and they're going to be brought in strategically in a big fight where they go, okay, we got the young guy. This young guy's probably going to be able to beat him. And the closer the fight comes, the matchmakers and the promotion go, did we choose the right guy? It's a little nerve wracking, you know? But what do you think here? Because to me, X Factor, Josh Kelly kind of does that Michael Conlon thing where he looks amazing and then gasses out in the fight. Do you think he doesn't do that in this fight? Because I feel like if he does that, Liam Smith is totally the wrong guy to do that with.
He's definitely the wrong guy to do it with. I do think that Liam sort of hit a wall in that second Eubank fight. He just looked like he couldn't quite get the engine turned over, and Eubank fought a sharp fight, of course. If Kelly wants to have a certain trajectory, a certain future in the sport, this is the kind of fight he has to look impressive in. And if he doesn't, I think it just sort of keeps him in the spot that he's in. But in theory, I think that this is a fight that Kelly should win. Maybe not by knockout, but I would expect by a somewhat wide decision.
Does the winner possibly fight Xander Zayas in the not too distant future if he wins his
I,
fight coming up?
I think that's a great idea, honestly. And I think that somebody with the hand speed, the skill set, even though Kelly's just always had the issue of like he can't pick a thing to do, so there's a lot of waiting. But he's a guy who can basically do everything, and it would be interesting to see him in with Xander, and it would be interesting to see Xander in with Smith should he win. Splitting the 2 fights with Eubank and then getting a win over Josh Kelly would put him in a good position.
The weight classes don't entirely make sense, and I know Brad Goodman and Bruce Trampler are much better at matching fights than me, but that seems like a good if the weights could work out, that would be an interesting main event type fight. Joshua Buatsi will be rounding out this card, taking on Willy Hutchinson. Hutchinson, I had no clue who he was until he beat Leron Richards on that 5 versus 5 card. Buatsi is a guy that I've gotten to know in the gyms. He's also a guy that I thought was going to be a superstar coming out of the 2016 Olympics. To me, this is a no-brainer. Joshua Buatsi wins by any means necessary. There's a form of a vacant interim WBO light heavyweight title, which I assume means that if you win this fight, you're in the running to see what the heck happens after Bivol and Beterbiev fight and possibly vacate, or you just get paid more with a mandatory minimum. But to me, this is Buatsi getting an opportunity to kind of show what I think a lot of us believe he has.
And just to clarify something, you said he beat Lerone Richards, and I was looking at it, was actually Craig
Craig,
Richards.
fact check. Yeah, I got the
Lerone is
wrong
actually
Richards.
Lerone's actually a really good fighter that we never get to see, unfortunately. But yeah, Willie Hutchinson is just a guy that's unfortunately kind of slipped through the cracks for me, and I haven't been able to see him. So I'm not too sure what he brings to the table, but I
Physical,
would love to
tough
see.
guy. I think that's describing him in a sentence.
Right.
Just physical, tough guy. Possible cringy interviews.
Sure.
Possibly like you put the mic on him, something awkward could happen. But he's bringing a lot of grit, determination, toughness, and he can think a little bit. But I think when fights slow down, he's shown that he doesn't like a slow fight. He likes kind of a grueling, tougher test.
Do you think the Buatsi ever graduates out of the sixth man spot that he's in? Does he ever get in with?
So he goes from deadlift shrimp to. So are you saying is he deadlift shrimp when he was on the Sonic six man, or is he James Harden when he was on the Thunder six man, and then he gets to be on his own team and a superstar? Is that the comparison?
That is what I'm saying. You know, is he a guy that's ever going to get in with the Benavides, the Beterbeeves, the Bevols, even the Vosdicks?
I
The
think
the
so. My comp as an NBA player would be my beloved Bobby Jackson. I think that he's an exciting guy off of the bench. I don't know where Bobby went when he left the Kings, but I'm sure he was a starter and exciting somewhere. I think that's what Buatsi will probably do. He'll probably fight mostly in Britain. I think that he's going to get his shot, but his shot comes from winning this fight. So he has to win this fight, and then there's going to be a guy there. There's going to be a Benavides. There's going to be a Morel. There's going to be, you win a fight like this, you get a belt. There's a fight for you.
Yeah, I'd like to see him in fights like that. He feels like he's occupied this same spot for the last 3-4 years now.
And I just feel like once you win a belt, you can't just do nothing unless you're really rich. So once you have a belt, there's going to be other guys that want that belt because they want what comes with it, the fame, the money, the attention. So like you really can't get that many uninteresting fights when you have belts. Like we complain about them because we complain, but really world titles lead to very interesting fighters with some form of pedigree taking on.
Yep.
Just to quickly touch on it, what do you think of this Jaime Munguia Erik Bazinyan fight? I will give you my quick thoughts. I think it's not the greatest fight. Bazinyan should have lost his last fight to, I can't even remember the guy's name. I want to say it's Fan on a Eye of the Tiger card. And then as quickly as he should have lost, he's thrown right into one of the biggest punchers, Jaime Munguia. If that doesn't tell you that there's concern about his career, I don't know what does. To me, this screams of an early round knockout and Munguia getting a lot, a lot of attention from this.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple good names on his resume. He's got a win over Marcelo Corceras, over Alantez Fox. Ronald Ellis is a decent fighter. There's some decent, names that you would have to get through to kind of ascend up the ranks of the division. So he has checked those boxes. But outside of that, I don't know enough about him to know if he has any chance against Jaime Munguia.
His last fight was bad, Dakota. I mean, he just got bullied and beat up. He's a guy that when he pushes forward and his power works, he has something. When he's pushed backwards, it looks like he really doesn't have a second gear. And I just don't see that working against a guy like Jaime Munguia.
Probably not.
And Munguia is now back with Eric Morales, no longer with Freddie Roach. Um, can't wait to see the video pieces to talk up that relationship and bond. That'll be fun. I just think that this is going to be a brutal knockout for Munguia. It's going to be a little viral clip, and it's going to set the stage. He's fighting on a Top Rank card, but then on the press release, it said in association with Golden Boy. I am confused with the clarification of what is going on promotionally, but you know what? I don't care. Promoters put on the fights. We don't have to worry about it. Munguia's
I'm
fighting
not a
on
businessman. I'm not a
Munguia's fighting on
businessman.
ESPN. That means it's a free fight if you have a streaming platform or an ESPN Plus subscription. It's a reasonable price. So I'm all for that. That Munguia's in front of a lot of eyeballs potentially. He's an exciting fighter. He lets his hands go. That's a net positive for the sport. So I'm not worried.
Also, just fighting a young, undefeated prime guy.
Which, Munguia silently is becoming a capital G guy, Mexican fighter without a lot of attention.
Yeah, we can only hope that this leads to him and Pacheco, because I truly think that that's like a very exciting matchup.
Even him and Berlanga. There's Munguia could sneaky have an amazing career after a slow build because I feel like now he's ready to jump in with anybody. And if he just jumps in with anybody, I feel like he'll be a beloved figure. Because if you remember, Canelo for a long period of time was moved very carefully and people were very critical of him. And then he just jumped in with guys. And I think that that's something to remember. Andres Cortes versus Charly Suarez. I believe they're number 2 and number 3 in the WBO rankings at super featherweight, right below Albert Bell. What are your thoughts on this?
I'd sneaky think Suarez could win that fight. I think that we saw some of the maybe conditioning limitations with Cortez against Abraham Nova, and we don't know if that's making weight. We don't know if that's how he's training. We don't know what the reason for that is, but there were some gas tank issues. And I just think he's an older kind of vet, right? He had a longer amateur career, and he's a very, very slippery cat, bro. I think that's a tough fight to call.
So another interesting one, Joey Dawejko, Richard Torrez Jr. This is a real fight. Joey's a true veteran. Richard Torrez, to me, is really an exceptional talent who just is not being matched for whatever reason with guys that I think that he could be matched with. This is his first kind of test. Joey's not going to be a guy that's just going to be happy to show up. He's going to be there to win.
Yeah, I'm always kind of looking forward to seeing Richard Torres face some level of professional resistance. And even if that's just being tricky to hit, knowing how to throw a quick counter, I think Dawejko can provide some of that resistance.
Okay, that's the show for this week. We will be back next week with another tape delayed show that will be a lot quicker than our streaming class. Dakota, what should people know about you?
Uh, what should they know about me? You can find me on the Lukie Boxing Show. You can find me on ITR Boxing. You can find me at the Slip and Weave Podcast, all on Instagram or YouTube.